Thank you all very much for taking the time today as we continue to try to build and expand our Performing Arts Discovery American Sounds program. I'm Molly Quinlan Hayes, Deputy Director for Programs and Accessibility Coordinator here at South Arts. We have been really pleased over the last 4 years to work with a wide variety of artists and managers in tandem with our wonderful consultant crew of Andrea Snyder and Carolinda Dickey. Thanks for being on this adventure with us. We have a small enough group that I think it might be helpful for our participants to just introduce themselves and where you've kind of intersected with the PADAS program. And then Andrea will introduce our two guest speakers today, Mike and Jakob Graf.
So why don't we start with Aaron? Do you want to just jump in here and say where, how you connected in with, you're connected in with PADAS?
Sure, yeah. First cohort that Molly put together, I helped with some of the selection process. And we also have artists that I've worked with who are part of the program, like Liz Cohen and John Lockyer.
Okay, so we're getting a little feedback, and I don't know, Jordan or Molly, should we ask everyone to mute unless they're speaking?
Yeah, absolutely. That would solve the problem.
Okay.
I think it's that the two of you are in the same room and your stuff is bouncing back and forth.
Potentially. Jen, will you mute this when you're not?
The headphones should solve that feedback issue for them.
What's that?
If you wear headphones, then it can't feedback through the system. So headphones or mute yourself.
Okay.
Okay. Who would like to talk next? Robert, do you want to say how you connected in with PADAS and what you do?
Yes, we were part of the showcase in Orlando, Florida. We are a singing group and a theater group. We trace the history of African Americans through drama and song. We sing a cappella. And we've been doing this. We started in high school in 1967, graduated in 68, reunited 10 years later for a class reunion, and we've been performing ever since. We had a marvelous experience and appreciate this opportunity.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Robert, remind people the name of your group.
The Princely Players.
Okay.
Who else? Let's see, I'm missing let's see, who else is on the call? I forgot. I'm losing a face here. What happened to Ron?
Ron?
Here I am.
There you are. I don't see you, Ron, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Ron Days. My wife Natalie and I perform Ron and Natalie Days. We do also a cappella singing and storytelling about Gullah Geechee culture, and history, and heritage of South Carolina, Georgia. Also, the northern part of Florida, the southern part of North Carolina, and we participated in Orlando, Florida as well, the showcase there.
Great. And Jed? Anything to add? You're muted.
Yeah, okay, I just unmuted. Yes, so I work with Aaron at the Music Maker Foundation, and we present blues artists, folk artists, and I'm a little new at Music Maker, so I'm excited to see what I can learn here.
Good.
Take back to my work.
Thank you. Anybody that we've missed or anyone new that got on? I don't think. So I'm Andrea Snyder, and I want to introduce my colleague, my Carolinda Dickey. We are independent consultants. We all work in the dance field predominantly, and we've been going on this journey with Molly and South Arts for several years as coordinators and managers of PADAS. Carolinda, you want to say hello?
Well, I can add that we are now just finished our 3rd edition of PADAS this past fall, where we met you guys. We also have one coming up in the spring, which will be jazz focused. And you cannot imagine how much more about music Andrea and I know than we did 4 years ago. So thank you to the artists and South Arts for that.
And particularly Southern music, which is really rich. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to introduce, we on this webinar, we actually decided it would be wonderful to incorporate some voices of people on the ground working in the field of music, both internationally and nationally. And so we approached one of the international guests that attended PADAS this past fall, Jakob Graf. Jakob, you want to wave hello and say
Hi,
where
everyone.
where
Hello.
are you now?
I'm in Geneva, Switzerland.
Good, thank you. And we also have asked Mike Green. Mike Green is an agent here, a music agent here in the United States. Mike, where are you located?
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And Mike is, we've sort of splitting up this webinar to talk about two particularly big topics. One is communicating with programmers, and the other is about being tour ready. And Jakob and Mike are going to take it from the two sides of the coin, from the international side and from the domestic side. So what we'd like to do is have them, we will, Carolyn and I will sort of kick in with a few questions and moderate the conversation and spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about how you communicate with programmers and presenters. And when I say programmers, that's our terminology for international presenters, whereas in the United States, they're called presenters. So they're the same thing. And have Jakob and Mike both put their perspectives on the issue, and then pause so that you can ask questions in regards to this particular area of concentration. And then we'll move on to being tour ready, and Mike will lead into that, and Jakob will add some thoughts about that, and we'll end with questions relevant to that part of the webinar, that section of the webinar. So everyone's sort of on board. If you have a burning question, Jakob says you're fine to interrupt him. We just want to make sure the flow of the dialogue continues and we can capture everything in the next 45 minutes that we have, because we said we would end by 11 o'clock.
Andrea, can I kick in one just terminology? The other word that gets used in between programmer and presenter is promoter. And basically, it's sort of all the same thing, but a promoter is a commercial version and a presenter is a nonprofit. They're essentially doing the same thing.
Good, thank you for that.
Those words kind of interchangeably. There are some cultural differences, but that's, yeah, so
Right.
people aren't too confused.
Right, okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's just jump in. It's 10:15. We'll spend the next 15-20 minutes talking about communicating with programmers, promoters, presenters, the 3 Ps. We, Carolyn and I, laid out a few questions just to get them, Jakob and Mike, starting to think about how you would communicate with a programmer. So Jakob, I'm going to jump in here and ask you if you wouldn't mind leading off the conversation with what your thoughts and recommendations are for these artists and the artists who may be listening to this long distance when they get it, about how to communicate with international programmers. What are the best methods and what's the timing, how often, all the things that wrap up into ways that they should be communicating with international programmers.
Right. So maybe to start off, there's in my work, I would say about 80% of my contact with international artists runs through agents, and only 10 or 20% is directly with artists. So that proportion will vary, but for any presenter, the intermediaries, especially with overseas tours, are important. It will also vary with the artist's profile. The better known, the more commercially viable, the more agents and entourage he will have, obviously. We're going to focus mostly on the percent where I talk directly to artists, as I understand today. It is important, I think, for an artist, before he gets in touch with a promoter, I use the term promoter, to understand what that promoter does and the environment he operates in. So this can be personal preferences, but it's broader than that. It is that presenter or promoter working commercially, like Mike just said? Is he most likely to be non-profit? Does he work in seated venues? Is it club shows? Does he work on festivals? Does the festival have a branding? Is it a jazz festival, a folk festival? These seem basic things, but I often get, especially when they come straight from artists, I often get offers and proposals that for very obvious reasons I will not be able to put on, because they will not fit the venue that I actually promote. They will not fit my summer series. They will not fit my stage, often for very practical reasons. And before we get to do I like it or do I not like it, do I want to defend this, I will already, I never do heavy metal shows. I don't put on DJs, and so on and so on. So to get that out of the way will really help, because if you do pitch something to me that is kind of something that I can't put on, it tells me that you didn't look up, that I'm likely to be reading a mass mail, that you didn't study, and it will make your second email less likely to be read. I'll be less likely to think, ooh, this was an interesting proposal, I'm going to read up on this, I'm going to find out. So there's a very general remark. I'm going to try and give some useful information, because this is very abstract. Club shows and festivals, not the same. Festivals, you don't have to sell tickets on one artist. You sell a festival lineup. A club show, for a headliner artist, you have to sell tickets. So depending on what country you work with in Europe, the pressure to sell tickets will be different. If you're working with the UK, which for a lot of American artists will kind of be a first stop, they're very unlikely to have public money in small clubs. This means the promoter will mostly run on ticket sales. There's a kind of a general figure that people will give you, that for the promoter for it to be sustainable and worthwhile, he needs to make about twice the amount at the door than he's paying you as a fee. So if you know that in order to sustain your tour, you need five shows paying, I don't know, $1,500, you should be aware that if you're asking a promoter in England for $1,500, he will be looking to make $3,000 at the door. You can break that down. You can break that down to 300 tickets sold at $10 or 150 at 20. You can look up what ticket prices usually are in that venue. You can actually work with these figures to see if your proposal is viable, interesting. If you're an unknown act, it probably isn't. This means you've got because you probably won't sell 300 tickets at $10 or half of that at 20. So you're more likely to be looking at festivals, or you're likely to be looking at clubs that don't have to break even the same way. France and Switzerland, Belgium, still has a bunch of clubs that are subsidized, that have a lot of public money in it. You're more likely to find a promoter who doesn't have to the same pressure on ticket sales in those countries than you will be in the UK or in Germany. These things are to be considered before we're talking personal preference of the promoter. Then, of course, you should also look at what that promoter usually books. You can find our lineups. We're usually quite proud of our lineups. Festival bookers will this is the moment where we get to express ourselves. We get to choose certain artists over others. This is the choice we do have. And so we are looking to produce lineups that we're proud of, that we want to defend, that we tell all our friends about, look at the lineup I've got, and so on. So if you have an idea about our lineups, that is the equivalent of me having listened to your music. We're just as likely to respond to flattery as any human being. If you tell me, oh, I looked at your lineup last year, it's really nice, I love those bands, that's a good opener. I'll be more likely to kind of take it from there, get interested. It usually works. So if you find out then about our lineups and preferences, you should also find out, we're not usually talking this figure of 80% is with agencies, we're not talking to hundreds of artists. You can break it down. You will usually find that we work with the same agencies over again. So try and see what agencies these artists are on. You will find that we're working in an environment of aesthetics, of networks that you can already narrow down and understand quite a bit about just by looking at our lineups, at these artists, who is representing them. And then if you don't want to do that work promoter by promoter, you can actually turn it around. If you're planning a tour as an artist from the States and you want to find out, so who are the promoters who are likely to work with acts like me? Turn it on its head, the whole reasoning. Find an act that is likely to be similar to you, that is likely to have a similar following, similar aesthetics. Find an act that's already toured Europe that is similar to you, and find out what venues they played. Write to those venues before you write emails to random lists of contacts.
Jakob, I'm going to pause you. I'm going to just pause here. What you've said is just extraordinarily valuable. The concept of research, doing your research and doing your homework before you even make an attempt to contact somebody is critical. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah. And I have some questions, but I want to make sure, Mike, do you have anything, Mike, can you add in terms of whether this is similar to what you would recommend an artist does on the domestic level, and or anything that you want to add in relationship to international communication?
What Jakob has said more than covers all my notes here. That was really complete. The general idea that you have to pay attention to who you're talking with, before you waste anybody's time, really makes a lot of sense.
Let me ask both of you, when an artist makes a contact or sends an email, let's say Jakob to you, do you expect that they're going to incorporate some link so that you can hear music? What would drive you to want to hear their music?
Oh God.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Maybe that's
this comes from one of the. I already said half of the answer, but it comes from somebody who works in one of the bigger agencies in the UK. And I once sent him a PDF of several pages about one of my bands, because before I was a promoter, I would also represent local bands. He told me never send me long PDFs again. He said, start by saying, hi, Rob, hi, Jakob. Start with the first name, your email. Then tell me you've done your homework. So I like your roster, great lineup. And then all I want is the link, and I'll listen, and that will be it. So I would add to that it helps me if I can pin that to something I already know. So if that link if it comes from somebody I know, I'm more likely to not just to click it, but to listen differently, because I'm a big fan of the theory that we really don't listen the same way, depending on what situation we're in, how we were prepared to it. So I'll be likely to listen more attentively, even if I'm trying to give all these links the same attention. I just know for a fact that I don't, depending on who they come from, what the situation is. If I can bring that link back to another musician I know, to somebody they opened for, to somebody they played with, to a label they've been signed on. So if during your homework you find any obvious link between what you are doing and what I've done before, please point it out to me. That will really help.
Good. Mike, do you have something to add? Anything? I didn't want to cut you off. I just had this question that I didn't want to miss saying.
Yeah, it's kind of a variation on the theme, but the type of promoter or presenter you're dealing with will change the way that you might approach them. If you're dealing with a club and they're looking at the commercial bottom line, you might lead with, okay, this artist sells this many tickets in similar markets, or the last time they were in the market, they sold this many tickets, which leads them to believe this is going to be a good financial outcome. If it's a cultural thing and you understand what the mission of the organization is, you might lead with how the artist really fits that in a very specific way. But again, getting back to what Jakob said, do your homework. And no, if an artist doesn't have any history in a market and you're trying to sell tickets in a 500-seat club and nobody in that market knows who they are, you're wasting your time, but you may want to figure out how do you build an audience in that market some other way before you come and try to headline that club.
So one of the things to add for the artists here is that as part of the homework and research, it may be wise for them to connect or identify colleagues, other artists that they know that are in a similar genre, and find out or see where they have toured in order for them to, in order to understand where the possibilities might be.
Yes, I'm going to give you a very concrete example. A good email to write is, "Hi, Jakob. We see you are promoting a Robert Finley gig next Saturday in Geneva. He worked with Music Maker Relief Foundation. Here is all the other exciting artists that we work with at Music Maker Relief Foundation." That will tell me that you know that I'm actually right now trying to sell tickets for Robert Finley next Saturday in Geneva.
Good luck. But for the artists on the call and those who will be listening to this, there are several ways to get at and focus on how to communicate. Clearly doing research is definitely one of them, and multiple layers of research. Another way is to find a connector, an advocate, somebody who they may know that you know, a mutual connection that will open a door. That's another method. For the artists, are there any other ways that, or issues around how to communicate with an international programmer promoter or a domestic programmer promoter that you want to raise a question about now?
I have a question, both to Jacob and to Mike. More and more often, Andrea and I have this problem ourselves. More and more often when we are trying to connect with somebody, a programmer or a presenter promoter, and we go to their website, people aren't listing email addresses any longer. It's very hard to find out how to actually, you both talked about email, and email is harder and harder to find now, especially in Europe with the new data laws. So what do you do when someone's trying to connect with you and you haven't posted your email?
I find that, I find that festivals in the U.S. are particularly, the bigger they get, they make themselves invisible.
Right.
They don't want to be found by everybody. So what I do is I look through who's played there and look for artists that are represented by agencies where I know somebody. And sometimes I can write to an agent pal and say, hey, can you share with me how to get in touch with the booker for this festival? Oftentimes, I find that usually that doesn't net me anything. I might get an email address, but if this festival programmer wants to be that invisible, if I don't have somebody that's like a blockbuster name for them, they just don't reply. I've found a lot of dead ends.
Let me ask a different question in terms of the link.
Let Jakob answer.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
I found on a very practical note that sometimes in the Facebook About section, people still have emails even though they've removed them from their webpage. So if you go through social media, just don't do the whole web spiel and not just the webpage, because often the email's still somewhere there.
All right, good, thank you. A question about the link and the music sample that somebody may send to you, that one of the artists on this call or someone else may send to you, Jakob, or Mike, in your case, sending out to a presenter. Do you agree that the presenter, the promoter, will want to hear the music and also see the artist in performance, or does it matter? Do they just need to listen to the music?
My go. No, I want to see him, but usually I'll find that link. If I like the music, what I do is I go on YouTube and I type the name of the artist, I type live or concert, and sometimes a recent year, a recent date, and that in 9 out of 10 cases that will spit up some footage. So what you want to do is control that footage, because yes, we will have a tendency to go look for it.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
we have on our website, we have a handful of the most current good video links that we have. So when I approach a presenter, I send out a series of links that I group them with the artist page on our website. It's a specific page for video links, and then the artist's own website, and then some other stuff. But yeah, we try to give them the best, most exciting video links right up front.
Good, good, thank you. Artists on the call, are there any questions regarding communication that you'd like to ask? And don't worry, if we'll have time at the end if something comes up. I want to move on in a minute or two to being tour ready. Any burning question that we haven't answered? Molly?
This is Molly. I have a question that some artists have asked me. And first of all, I have to say, you know, as a funder and an organization that hosts a conference, we are very frustrated by this spiral that happens of artists kind of e-blasting every PAE registrant, which makes the presenters want to withhold their email address, which makes it harder for artists to do research. So if there's any way in your work that you can help to stop that spiral, that would be good for everyone, I think. But we've had some questions from artists, for instance, at the Orlando performance this fall. You know, there was some opportunity to be in touch with the international programmers ahead of time. They were all seen in live performance and have each other's contact information now. From the artist's point of view, what would be appropriate follow-up at this point in terms of what, Jakob, you might want from them, or if they haven't heard from you, is that a sign that you're simply not interested? How frequently maybe should they reach out to you? Could you speak to that just a little bit?
Yes, something I'd typically be very interested is European tour dates, if they have found any dates in Europe. I'll also be interested in receiving information. I'm not so interested in, did you listen to the CD I gave you, what did you think? But I'm very happy to read through. I've actually found a few dates in the UK. I'm bringing out a new album. I signed with an agency. I'm now represented in Europe by someone. I have a new video clip. Any information is more than welcome. And if I haven't been in touch, that does not mean I'm not interested. Because like I explained in the beginning, there's much more than did I like it, did I not like it. I like a lot of music that I hear. And out of the stuff that I hear, it's very rare that it will fit an exact bill that I'm actually working on. And so, since also my mandates evolve, I work with different venues, I do different things, it is likely that that opportunity will come along at some point. And so, no, do be in touch. I would say it depends on the promoters. I find 3 to 4 times a year is sufficient to usually make a point. If you have infos, it can be less if you have a good reason. Why not make it more? But it's mostly about giving me infos and not assuming I'm not interested, but also not kind of asking, what did you think of this? What did you think of that? Keep me informed.
That's very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We're going to pause, take a breath, and I'd like to move into the issue of being tour ready. And we had a whole raft of questions that we sort of put out to Mike and Jakob, and they will riff on what being tour ready means. And Mike, I think I'd like to start with you, because you work with artists to get them ready, in fact, to what does it mean to be tour ready, and how would you help an artist?
Well, actually, we don't really take artists on unless they are more than tour ready. We don't.
What does tour ready mean?
Tour ready means they have a fair amount of experience already touring, recording, and they have built at least a strong regional audience, if not a national audience. So we don't take people too early in their career. We don't look for like the next big hit potential. We work with artists that look like they've already had something of an established career, and we take them further, or we just help them sustain a much longer career. But we have a whole criteria listed on our website of why we take people on. And it's, some of it is artistic. It's got to be, These are the people who are the best in the world at what they do, and that they have good organizational sense. They have good management and publicity team, or they take care of all those functions themselves. They actually know how to make decisions and communicate, and that they, at the point that we take somebody on, there has to be either enough income that it can justify our time, or we can see enough of a trajectory in what's happening with their career and their growth that we can see that fairly soon we're going to be profitable. Like for us, we're such a small agency, every artist on our roster matters a lot to us. So larger agencies may have more capacity for taking on somebody that's not established yet, and they can help work together to get to that point. We're just not like that, but you're going to get a different answer from every size and type of agency you talk to. The tour ready is all those pieces, but we do sometimes, an artist may come to us and they may not really have their marketing materials as strong as we'd like to see. So if one of those pieces is kind of weak, we can sometimes work on it. But part of it is the type of person. They have to have their act together. We don't want to work with somebody, because we work with mostly artists that are self-managed. I think we only have 2 managers out of the 10 that we work with. And if we have to babysit them too much, it's too labor intensive, you know.
So most of the artists that you work with are self-managed.
Right.
And that in and of itself says they have to understand their financial issues. They have to understand the parameters of what kind of venues they work in and can feel comfortable in. I mean, as you say, they've had some experience regionally. They already have had some tour exposure.
Right.
And you're taking them to the next level, or you're helping to sustain that market for them.
Yeah, something like that.
Right.
Every answer is totally different.
Right.
It's there's a lot of randomness that goes on in this world, but
yeah, I understand that. Jakob, do you can you add, or do you have something to add in terms of what you think tour readiness would be from an international point of view?
No, Mike covered a good share. Just insist on the fact that yes, the first part of any career, I think, needs to be self-managed. It will help later when you do work with agents or even managers. It will help to understand what you're delegating as an artist. It will help to understand what it's all about. It will help you find a manager if you've actually self-managed for a while. And it's just that as long as you're actually, don't wait for people to kind of make it happen for you. That is really important. And then, so that's, like I said, that also means that in special cases, don't hesitate to get in touch directly. There's still a bunch of artists I actually booked that aren't represented yet. But make those quests. If you're an American artist and you want to come over to Europe without an agent, you have to put in that much more research to really find those presenters who are likely to book you.
Yeah. That's a great point, Jakob. I'm thinking of one artist in particular represented many years ago who always had a staff of people. He always had agents and managers. And we worked with him later in his career when he didn't have a manager anymore. He didn't know how anything worked, even though he'd been very successful and had big hit records. He was impossible because he'd never learned the skills.
I think that's critical. Carolyn and I would both jump in here from the dance point of view, where we work most of our careers, that the artist really needs to understand how things work internally, that managers come and go. And if the artistic director or the artist isn't completely aware of how the budgeting is working and the marketing is working and all of the elements, then they're behind they're steps behind if they lose a manager and have to move on. So it's the same in the dance field as it is in the music field, the music industry. These things, artists have to take responsibility, we understand that, and be completely aware of everything around them and not just leave it to a manager to do all the work. Understood. I mean, it makes it more complicated for the artists, unfortunately, but in the end, it's better for them.
One of the things, sorry, Andrew, one of the things that we often tell dance artists is that they need to travel. They need to, get on a plane and grab their passport, get on a plane and go, because the organizational cultures in different countries in dance are very different. Music, I believe, is more universal. But how important is it, Mike and Jakob, that artists go and see some of these places that they want to perform before they perform?
I don't find that it's that critical all that often. I mean, there are places, when I travel for a conference, sometimes I'll just, if there happens to be a venue or a presenter that I've worked with in that city, I'll take a couple hours away from things to go see that. But it's not that critical, at least in our little world, because the technical specs are not a huge part of it like they would be for dance or for a show, any kind of music show that's more technically involving. So it's not that critical. We can work because of the network of people that we know. And again, we can look at where other artists are playing. You can look at a venue website and say, oh yeah, based on everything they have there, we can see this artist is going to fit there. It's not going to be any technical challenges. And you can tell by the size whether it's right for the most part. With enough experience, you can kind of suss that out.
How about internationally, Jakob? The same thing? Do you think that it not necessary to see the space?
I think to come back to the idea of homework, you can do it online. You don't need to come in person.
And what about in terms of being tour ready? What are the do not do things? What doesn't work in terms of being tour ready? Are they being overly marketing or technical issues? Anything that you can speak about there?
Well, one thing that I've seen it a lot in kind of the singer-songwriter world, especially, where it's so competitive that a lot of performers spend a lot of time on their marketing efforts, and they forget that ultimately their career is only built by writing better songs and doing better shows. They put more emphasis into selling themselves than doing great shows. And there are any number of artists that you've come across who are so good that it almost doesn't matter what they do marketing wise. Once audiences hear them, they respond. You have to make that your first job. The marketing and all the other business is critically important, but it's always second. And so not to confuse those two things.
Yeah, well taken. Artists on the call, are there questions that you have for either the domestic touring marketplace or the international touring marketplace that would help you understand how to get ready to tour? Or you all have toured, you know what to do? Okay, no questions there. Mike and Jakob, I'm going to give you the floor for another minute or two to sort of wind up any issues on either of these fronts or anything else that you'd like to help these artists understand.
Well, there was a lot of the questions that you had. I haven't gotten to really any of my notes about being tour ready that you asked me about.
Go ahead.
So I'll kind of blast through some of them. One was on setting fees and how to handle financial discussions. One is I think sometimes artists think that they can just sort of have their fee and just quote that everywhere and that you either get it or you don't. And that's kind of nonsense. It's the real world, and every situation is going to call for a different sort of a fee. So I think it's important to understand how different fee structures work, and we can't get into that today other than there's flat guarantees and all sorts of percentage arrangements. And when you're doing anything outside of a festival, it may be appropriate to look at some combination of guarantees and splits of ticket sales. And that's another whole seminar in and of itself, but to learn what those structures are and where they're appropriate. So when you're talking with a presenter, you can suggest something that's going to work. You do have to know what your bottom line financial needs are. If you're carrying a 5-piece band, you're the band owner, and you have to pay your band members by the gig, then yeah, you may have a real financial bottom line. If you're a 5-piece band that's collectively owned, you can all decide, okay, we're willing to invest in doing this, and we're going to go home with no money, but we're going to establish a new market or a new territory. All that stuff, you do need to know what your bottom lines are. Obviously, you got to do a tour budget. You got to look at what your travel costs are. If you have the overhead of, like, if you're paying a publicist, overall, you have to know your bottom line. But there are times when you make your money, and there are times when you need to invest in your career. And that's a really complicated ball of wax, but there's a lot of ways to go with that. In terms of quoting, I think one thing that we didn't quite get to in terms of communication is there is definitely a time to get off email and get on the phone. And getting hold of somebody from scratch is pretty tough to do sometimes on the phone to make an introduction. But when you get anywhere, I think email is great for data, just information, sharing links and stuff. But if you're trying to figure out something together and it's not working, I don't let that go past one or two emails where you think, we're not really hearing each other. Jump on the phone, and you can actually have a real-time conversation. I think it's really important for establishing a relationship or for figuring out how are we going to make this work. For financial stuff, I tend to quote in general terms over email, but when it gets into anything more complex, I prefer to have a conversation, get on the same page, and then follow up with an email saying, okay, here's what I think we understood, and here's what I suggest. You can get really specific and lay out whatever the financial structure might be.
Good points. Good points. Keep going.
Another one of the costs that's really important to get clear are everything related to tech on both sides. So you want to have a good tech writer that has all your needs listed, also have a good stage plot, because if you have to have backline provided, if you're flying or if you're going to carry it when you're driving, that's something to be really clear about at the outset when you're starting to make quotes, because the presenter has to understand what they're getting into on a technical side. They don't want to book a show and then find out as a complete surprise when they get the contract and rider that there's another $2,000 worth of tech that they hadn't planned on. And all of a sudden their offer doesn't make sense anymore. So all of that stuff is important at the outset, especially if you're like tech heavy.
Can you pause for a second? I have a question about that, both for Jakob and you. Is it customary in music, in negotiating and in booking, that one would send the tech writer before the gig is secured in order for them to know what they're getting into, or does the tech writer go along with the contract?
No, so like Mike just explained, I need the tech writer to make my offer, because I need to know I'm making an offer either on a fixed rate or on a door split. But I'm usually, England will not always cover your hotel. On the continent in Europe, you will find that offers usually include that the presenter pays for hotels, feeds the artist. I need to know how many people, I need to know how many rooms, I need to know if I'm renting in equipment. That will depend on the venue. Sometimes I'll work in a venue that has an amp and a drum kit, sometimes they won't. If I rent it in, if I have to rent an Ampeg bass amp in Geneva, Switzerland, that's about $500 just for the night. That's a lot of money. I need to know if I'm paying that on top of the fee, if that Ampeg's actually going to be in a minivan that tours with the band around Europe, if they're flying in and I need to rent it. So yes, I need it to make my offer.
Good, thank you, thank you. I assume that's the same, Mike, domestically, right?
It is, and I bring it up more depending on the artist and what I know their needs are. Like if I'm working with a very small venue and the budget is small and the artist needs a piano or keyboard, I better bring that up, because that could end up being $1,000 to bring in,
Right.
an acoustic grand piano and tune it.
Right.
Maybe a deal breaker.
So it just depends. But yeah, I try to remember whenever an artist needs a piano to bring that up in every case.
Yeah.
And some artists are simple enough that I know what the venue does. If it's a solo guitarist and singer and I know what they do, yeah, oftentimes you don't need to do the tech writer if there's going to be no surprises. But I kind of look like, where might the artist needs exceed what seems to be there at the venue.
Good, thank you, thank you. All right, we have about 5 minutes or so. Jakob and Mike, are there any thoughts, advice, important thoughts to share with this group before we sign off at 11 o'clock?
I'd love a question from someone, Music Maker Relief Foundation or anyone else. I'd love a question and try and be useful on something very specific.
This is Aaron. I still hear my video cut out for some reason. Jed, will you mute yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he's muted.
So I'm curious, the in-person opportunities to see artists perform that are afforded through organizations like South Arts and New York with APAP and like the one that just happened in Poland. Are those really important for talent buyers? You know, to see artists perform and showcase? Is that a really valuable experience? It can be very expensive for artists to do that, and I don't know. I'm curious.
Jakob and then Mike.
A lot of presenters are going, and a lot of presenters are doing their shopping in those events. I've started to the point where I've started to avoid them because I feel like if I want to have an original lineup, I better go places where I haven't been. So that's also one of the reasons why I actually was really thrilled to go to the IBM May in Raleigh, because not many European presenters will turn up there. Whereas, for example, in the world music scene, everybody will go to Womex. So for your artist then to judge, so basically still a lot of presenters go, and it is something for me to go to Raleigh. I've seen about 30 bands that I would have never seen in Europe, or it would have taken me years to get to see all these bands. So it is worthwhile, and even within Europe, a lot of people do their shopping there. It's also, I know it's expensive. To know if it's worthwhile for your artist will depend if you feel like you can make them being seen in that event, because there's so many artists there that it's also a very easy way to waste money and go unseen. And you will realize before those events happen, there's going to be a buzz going around. People will start to talk about certain artists. It's always the same thing. There's certain showcases you can't get in, and others that no one will show up. So if you can try and find out if you're going to be in the artists that will get the attention. Do you have something going on? Do you have agents that work in the area where this conference is happening? Do you have press going on at the moment? That will really help. And I would actually discourage it on a kind of in a cold environment. Just go there and see what happens. But if you feel something is happening, throw in one or two of these conferences can definitely help to get bookings.
Mike, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it gets back to what Jakob talked about at the very beginning. It's not just a matter of whether the presenter sees you and likes what you do, but all the other factors come into play. Can it work in their venue? Can they sell tickets? All the real world stuff is going on at the same time. An agent, Mitch Greenhill, told me years ago the way that you think about what's happening in a presenter's head when they're sitting in the audience. They're kind of split in three ways. One is they're just trying to enjoy the music as a human being in the audience. But the second part is they're trying to picture this show happening in their venue. So that could be very different. If you're seeing it in the theater and they're trying to program a huge festival stage or some very small intimate theater, they're trying to picture whether it works there. And then they have to look at all the practical parts of, can they sell this? Can they take this back and talk to their marketing department? And do they think they can actually make this work? Does it work with the size of the venues? All those other questions. So you can have what seems like a very successful showcase with no bookings as a result because the other pieces don't happen to fit. And then there are some artists that'll showcase a smaller conference like Arts Northwest, and get a string of 15 bookings because they just happen to be the right fit for everybody. So I've seen it both ways. I've actually had relatively few great successes with conference showcasing because we have artists that are highly regarded, but don't necessarily sell enough tickets in enough places.
Mm-hmm.
All that reality, it's a hard thing to swallow, but it's there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well put. Well put. Aaron, that gets to your question. Got it kind of covered?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else with a question? Robert or Ron or Jed?
I had a question.
Yes, go ahead.
And this is without research. What is the interest in a cappella performances, more so on an international market, as in music festivals? Even for the showcase, there were a lot of those performers, they had instruments. At the one we attended, we were the only a cappella group. There was great interest, but I don't know how that would transfer elsewhere on a performance stage internationally. Or what kind?
Jakob, do you have anything?
It's an unusual format. It's not often done. You will have kind of two. It makes me think of two things. Either it's traditional music, or then it will be the kind of the a cappella group that does more kind of cover songs of something poppy. If it's traditional music, it is, I think your best kind of bet is go towards festivals. It's probably not a headliner show. It will, again, it is an unusual format, but this also gives you a lead. So it comes back to my first thing: try and find other a cappella groups, see where they've toured. See if you find a commonality between those places. Why do certain places book a cappella groups and others not? So it's a specific format that I don't see often, but that also should help you to actually find your niche a lot faster.
Good, thank you. Mike, anything to add?
My first thought was that it isn't necessarily the fact that it's a cappella, but what does the show actually feel like, and how do people respond to it? And if it's something, and it depends on the venue, but if people respond to something because it's really exciting, they may not think about the fact that it's a cappella. If it works, it works, and if it gets through to people. So I wouldn't necessarily put yourself in that box only, because you don't only do a cappella music. There's more to it than, that's not the only thing that defines what you do.
Very good point.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a good point. We're just about at 11 o'clock. Does anyone have a burning question or burning thought that they'd like to add to this dialogue? You all feel like you've gotten something out of this. You can walk away, you've written some notes, you've got it down. It's opened up your mind to think a little bit. You're all good.
I think everybody is as wise as they're going to be right now. Yeah.
A little bit wiser. You're all a little bit wiser. Molly, do you want to close it down then?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jakob and Mike, for taking the time to prepare for this conversation. And we will get it to the broader swath of artists, but you really hit some key points today that I think are critical to share and incorporate more into this with our the artists that we work with. So thank you for that. I'll encourage all of you, if you haven't yet, to fill out our survey that we've been emailing you some reminders about. It's looking like we will be able to apply for funding for another round of PADAS, and so having your needs and your success stories in front of us will help us to shape that application.
I want to add one thing. I just forgot about this. For the artists, you may or may not know about United States Artists International, USA.
Oh, we're sending out, thank you, but we're sending out an e-blast about that today, but please say a word about it.
Okay, and for Jakob also, although Jakob, you wouldn't be able to apply, but you should know that if you invite, or you artists are invited to a festival or a marketplace overseas, you can apply for travel funds through the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation's program, USAI. It's competitive, and there are 3 rounds of funding in the year. South Arts will send out more information about that. So Jakob, if you are intrigued by an artist that you saw and you'd like to book them, they can apply, that artist could apply to try and get some travel money. No promises because it's competitive, but they could at least put an application in.
Yeah.
So you should tell the artist to do that. Okay.
I'm aware of this. Yeah, just everyone keep up the good work. It's tough. It can be frustrating. I have fond memories of the Princely Players and remembering to jamming with Odessa, and she singing for us on the porch. Love the people Music Maker Relief Foundation work with. Like I said, I've got a gig next week with Robert Finley.
Thanks.
So everybody just keep at it. As long as you're out there playing shows, you can always try new things and just keep going.
Good. Good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take good care. Happy holidays.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Hi, everyone.